puppy. Happy Friday. August 12th, it looks like. How's it going? I think I got my audio settings set up. There was a Windows update that was resetting all the audio settings. I need to make sure that was working before I start it up. So hopefully it is. Ook. It's like no one else has trickled in yet. Although usually when I say that, that's when someone's like, hey, and I'm like, oh, okay, I was wrong. Let's see what's new on the interwebs. Anything? Doesn't really look like it. Oh. Burritos. We're going to have burritos for dinner. Hopefully, they're not terrible. That'd be nice. Okay, you waited so patiently. Time for some treat. Hang on. His tail's just wagging. You can kind of see him in the reflection. Go get it. Did you get it? I think you did. Oh, you dropped that one. Where'd it go? Where'd it go? That's not it. There it is. Anything happening this weekend? The 13th and 14th. What? Yeah, I'm all out of treats. I mean, that's not true, there's more, but... Dumpling Festival? Dumpling Festival? Man. Oh. Also, hello. Happy Friday. Where's the Dumpling Festival? I just don't know if I'm ready to go to festivals yet. I mean, I suppose with like something like that, you could wear your mask until you've gotten your food and then try and find somewhere away from everybody else to eat, depending on how crowded it is. I don't know. I just don't trust people. Still gathering yourself together. Well, welcome home from work. It's Friday. Hopefully that means you get a little bit of time to yourself. We just got back from taking the pup for a walk around the neighborhood. Didn't see too many other people out and about, a couple. I think we only saw like one or two other dogs and out for walks, and they were at a distance. Although this tiny little, very groomed white, I don't know, Pomeranian or poodle or something, tiny little, in a window barking at us. Very, very spherical head. Just some a puppy that definitely gets trips to the stylists. It was pretty cute. I am a little sleepy. So yeah, not too much else new with me since Wednesday. So much time has passed. We're having burritos for dinner from a place we have not ordered from before, so hopefully they're all right. What do you think of the idea of, um, what are they called? Like kitchens that don't have a storefront, where you can only order delivery from them. You can't go pick it up yourself. You can't go in and order. They're just like a kitchen with no restaurant attached. Ghost kitchens. Yeah, what do you think of ghost kitchens as an idea? You're also homemade burrito like wraps. Homemade's better. We've got the stuff to make fajitas, but I don't think either of us had the energy today. Why don't we ever make like chicken Caesar wraps? It's weird that we don't do that. Personally, I'm not. Wraps are tricky. I mean, you can use corn tortillas for wraps as well as, you know, fajitas and burritos and things. Hmm. That reminds me, did the place we were ordering from, did they have an option for a flour or for a corn tortilla, or did you just order a bowl? You can still warm up a tortilla for a cold wrap. Like, you could have a chicken Caesar wrap and just warm up the tortilla ahead of time. Ah, tacos, I see. But yeah, ghost kitchens. I I don't know. I don't know about ghost kitchens. There's not really a solid reason for them to be like any worse in quality other than the delivery only nature. Um, but I just feel like it's kind of in the title itself. Like if they don't serve good food, or if they don't, I don't know, if they make mistakes or whatever, they can just close up and reopen under a different name, something like that. So I just feel like I don't have a lot of confidence in them as a business model in ordering from them, because I feel like, I don't know, they have no need to they have less need to worry about their reputation, I think, is my concern. Is that weird? Is that just me being overthinking it? I'm not certain whether the place we ordered from tonight, whether or not they are a ghost kitchen, means that their reputation is based just on their food and not their service or atmosphere. There is that, but I kind of feel like, it's just easier to, like, oh, we've got bad reviews, let's just erase that name and then continue on under a different name or something like that. They do have dining and eating. Ah. Might be a bonus if they're good. Well, whatever. So, a dumpling festival. Right, where is that? What part of the world is that in? The dumpling festival. I mean, I assume it's somewhere local, but which side of local is it? Coquitlam. Ah, that's accessible for us. Coquitlam Dumpling Festival. I'll have to look it up. See what's going to be there. So, we're getting real close to being done. We've got 106 pages left. Should we get through all 106 tonight? Haha. It's a new festival this year. Yeah, I wonder how that's gonna go. Like, I can't imagine there's that many, like, dumpling food trucks. So is it just gonna be people, like, setting up stalls, like, just for this festival? Or is there gonna be anything other than food trucks there? Are there gonna be dumpling-related activities? Dumpling toss? Like beanbag toss, but dumplings? Are they going to have screenings of that movie, which I think is called Bow? There's an entertainment lineup. All right. Dumpling jugglers. Looks like there are dumpling and non-dumpling foods. Non-dumpling foods at a dumpling festival? I can't imagine those are going to sell very well. Or they'll sell really well to everyone who's like had their fill of dumplings and wants something to cleanse their palate. Wonder if anyone's gonna have dessert dumplings. Ice cream dumplings. Ice cream mochi is delicious. Does mochi count as a dumpling? Designed to fight racism at a park where there was a public racist attack sometime in the last couple of years. Oh dear. That's... Ugh. Which park is it at? Multiculturalism through shared love of different dumplings. Is that Lafarge? I'm not familiar with that one. This bookmark is like a magnetic bookmark where it, like, I guess is designed to close around a page or something. I have never felt the need to use it in that fashion. And an art display. A dumpling art display? Yeah, I don't know. I'd be like worried that I would forget that it was closed around a page and I'd go to take it out and like rip a page or something in the book. I feel like I've got a hair on my face somewhere. It's bothering me. Well, anyways, why don't we read some book, huh? Why don't we read Magician's Gambit by David Eddings, Book 3 of the Belgariad, Chapter 23, on page 249. You've closed just paper around a page. I see. As is their custom. As is tradition. I do have... Let's see if I can see one. Yeah, is that one of them? I've got a little bookmark that I actually quite like. Which, here you can see it inside Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And it's a little leaf. A leaf bookmark. I had a few of them, and I'm not sure if there's any others in some other books. Yeah, there's another one in a book on the shelf behind me back there. I don't think you can really see it on the camera, but it's like right there. But I don't think it's really showing up. Good choice of book for a favorite bookmark. Yeah. Put that back. The only downside to the little leafy bookmark is that it's quite short. Like, it only goes a little ways into the book. But it is kind of like rubbery, so it sticks well, but I feel like it's easy to lose and easy to like fall out if you've got it resting on an open page or something like that. Once the book's closed, it's pretty solid though. Yeah, so page 249, chapter 23. I'm going to read a book. Everybody ready? Ready, steady, ready, Freddy, ready, Eddie? Actually, let's see. Yeah, so in the previous chapter, in the previous two chapters, they were at the supply outpost in Cthulhu resupply station, and they visited with seems like a friend of Silk's named Yarblek, a Nadrak. Maybe the like first or second friendly Angarak we've met, I think, depending on how you count that one woman that Dernick did not approve of. And she seemed more like a friendly enemy than an actual friend. Yarblek seems closer to actually being just outright friendly. The whole shared enemies thing going on. Yarblek seemed like an interesting character. I like Yarblek. Weird name. And yeah, definitely like feel like we're learning a little bit more. Sharkies like him a lot. We're learning more about Angarak cultures that are not just murder and sacrifice all the time. The kind of scoundrel you'd want to hang out with, even if he considers it's interesting. The Nadrak culture seems interesting in that it sounds like women are considered property, but property with self-government of some kind. Like, at least in an adventure scenario. Yeah, that's fair. Like, he was, asking to buy Aunt Pole or asking if she'd run away, but also was kind of like, if I tried to steal you, you'd just kill me, wouldn't you? So it's like, and I don't remember whether that gets addressed again later on. And I'm not sure whether I should say if I did remember. But it's sort of an interesting, like, women are property, but only technically. And maybe they're actually running the show, who knows? But other than that, yeah, Nadraks seem interesting. And it is. So far we've got what? We've got Murgos, who are, I don't know, horrible, grim soldiers that are just like half of them are spies disguised as merchants. They've all got scars on their faces. We've got Thulls, who are kind of seem like the Angarak equivalent of Errands, in that they're not considered very intelligent, but sadly they're also kind of treated like cattle, it seems like. They're just working their whole lives trying to accumulate enough money to buy slaves so that they don't get sacrificed, and or they're just staying pregnant for as much of their life as they can so they don't get sacrificed. So those seem to really not have good lives. We've got Grolems, who are like Murgos except magic. We've got the Dagashi, who are like Murgos except ninja spies. And now we've got Nadrax, who are very different. Who, I don't know, the description kind of made me think like Mongolians, kind of. Like the clothing and the tent he was in put me in mind of Mongolians, but maybe that's just, there's probably another culture that it's more closely based off of. Maybe I just don't know many yurt or tent dwelling cultures. And maybe that's just a temporary setup and it really has nothing to do with their culture because they were at a place where it was mostly tents, like the Great Erendish Fair. But yeah, they were hanging out with Yarblek. But then Silk heard that Tar Urgas was coming to town and got the heck out of there. You felt like the Algars were more Mongolian? Yeah, that's fair. The horse relationship is definitely a good point. Hmm. I'm looking forward to some stuff to come regarding Algarians. We'll learn more about Algarians for sure later. I don't think that's a spoiler. Yeah. So, Silk heard that Tar Urgas was coming to town and was like, I gotta get the heck out of here. I killed his eldest son, so I gotta go. And unfortunately, Brill was waiting with a net and caught Silk, who got roughed up and got us our head injury spot on the bingo card. Which is, this is where we're at now. We're getting real close to a bingo. You know, what do we do? Got distracted looking at dumplings. What do we do when we get a bingo? What's the prize? I feel like I should do something. We probably should have figured that out ahead of time. What's our incentive here? I feel like I should leave that up to you guys, but Farmos, any ideas? What do we do if I get a bingo? If we get a bingo? Yeah. Yeah. So the spots that would get us a bingo at this point, in the B column, Belgrath being a dirty old man. In the first row, Garion being cocky would get us a bingo. And in the N column, disbelief in Belgrath or magic or Polgara. Someone who doesn't believe would get us a bingo. Those I think are the only singles that would do it. An AMA. I feel like I kind of just do that at any point anyways. And then we're 2 off in the O column. And actually diagonally, we're 2 off now. Hetar or Garion being uncomfortable with world leaders, which we've skirted around. And in the 4th row, Garion being uncomfortable with world leaders or doing something unexpected. We're 2 off. G and I, we are missing almost like all but 1 spots in both G and I. So those are our 2 furthest away. Anyways, yeah, Silk got captured, got thrown in a pit. Everyone panicked and hid behind a hill. And then Relg walked through the hill and dragged Silk out of there through the rock, which Silk did not enjoy. And that's pretty much where we're at now. With them getting out of Spotch, getting out of Dodge. So, chapter 23. They rode hard through the rest of the night and for most of the following day. By evening, their horses were stumbling with exhaustion, and Garion was as numb with weariness as with the biting cold. I guess Silk is riding one of their pack horses, or maybe they had a spare. Poor horsies. Yeah, especially the one that died when Silk got captured. We'll have to find shelter of some kind, Dernick said as they reined in to look for a place to spend the night. They had moved up out of the series of connecting valleys through which the South Caravan route wound, and had entered the ragged, barren wilderness of the mountains of central Cthulmergos. The mountains, we saw those on the map. It had grown steadily colder as they had climbed into that vast jumble of rock and sand, and the endless wind moaned among the treeless crags. Dernick's face was creased with fatigue, and the gritty dust that drove before the wind had settled into the creases, etching them deeper. We can't spend the night in the open, he declared. Not with this wind. Go that way, Relg said, pointing toward a rockfall on the steep slope they were climbing. His eyes were squinted almost shut, though the sky was still overcast and the fading daylight was pale. There's shelter there, a cave. They had all begun to look at Relg in a somewhat different light since his rescue of Silk. His demonstration that he could, when necessary, take decisive action made him seem less an encumbrance and more like a companion. Belgarath had finally convinced him that he could pray on horseback just as well as he could on his knees, and his frequent devotions no longer interrupted their journey. It's kind of become Relg Ex Machina, kind of like the second book at times was Hetar Ex Machina. Was the second book Hetar Ex Machina with just him killing Murgos? I guess also some monsters. We are in the stages of Relg shows what he's capable of, at least. I mean, some of the setup with Silk's capture was a little convenient, right? We knew ahead of time that Relg could push himself into stone. They demonstrated that as soon as we met him. But the whole Silk got thrown in a pit that just happened to be a naturally occurring fissure, and all of the surrounding everything happened to be rock, was all definitely a little, convenient, I guess. I mean, they did kind of say, like, all of Cthulmergos is bloody rock. But, yeah. Definitely a little, like, it's a good thing. I mean, I guess the only structure nearby was the supply place, and so that probably wasn't established as a prison. But it's a good thing they didn't put Silk in a cage, for example. So, his frequent devotions no longer interrupted their journey. His praying thus had become less an inconvenience and more a personal idiosyncrasy, somewhat like Mandaralan's archaic speech or Silk's sardonic witticisms. Our RPG character who was a wizard who only really used a lot of magic in the most absurdest of moments. I've only played one wizard myself, and that was back in 3.5. And he joined the party partway through when some other characters of mine left the party. And he was he was half elf, half gold dragon. So because in 3.5 there was a half dragon template, kind of like the Dragonborn that are in 5th edition, but it was more literally like draconic ancestor, or I guess probably draconic parent. And he was an old man, but being an old elf dragon meant he was really old, and he was very crotchety, and I don't think he used a single damage dealing spell in that entire game. I don't think he had any damage dealing spells prepared, or maybe even learned. Like, he didn't know Fireball, he didn't know Lightning Bolt. He just used like Solid Fog and Grease and Web and like, he might have known like Shatter or something, which maybe technically could do damage, but he only used it to like break locks and doors and things. He was a fun character though. There was this one time, like, every night when they went to sleep, he would just cast Rope Trick and climb up into his own little personal extra dimensional space and go to sleep there for the night. And there was this one night, and he would cast like Alarm before he went out in case the rest of the party needed him, so they could touch the alarm spot and alert him. And this one night that they got attacked by werewolves in the middle of the night, and he just kind of came on floating out of his portal in his pajamas, and I think he cast like Solid Fog and then set about making himself tea for the rest of the fight while he was flying, just sort of hovering around making tea. Anyway, sidetrack. Yeah, the professor. Professor Coesruil, I believe was his name. You mentioned D&D, so obviously I got sidetracked. Well, actually, you didn't mention D&D. You mentioned a tabletop role-playing game, which could have been a different system. All right. Hem. Simninoth? Yeah, that sounds right. I'd forgotten the first name. And the second name was definitely spelled differently. There was an H in there, and it was more like Ru-Il. But, yeah. It was like K-O-H-E-S-R-U-I-L or something like that. It's been a long time, so it's your first game, but you think it was 3.5 as well. I liked 3.5. It definitely had huge balance problems, but if you had a group of players who were willing to balance their characters around each other, or accept that it was going to be imbalanced, there were just so many supplements with so many, prestige classes and things like that, that you could make just a massive, it was very customizable. You could do all kinds of different things and make all sorts of interesting, unique characters. And I think 5th edition has done a great job of being more balanced, and they have definitely come out with a lot more sort of subclasses and things, but it still, I don't think, comes even close to approaching 3.5's array of just everything you could do, which is both good and bad. Honestly, I kind of think I prefer how streamlined 5th is overall, but you couldn't beat 3.5. I mean, you probably could with something, but as far as D&D goes, 3.5's just customizability was pretty nice. But you really did have to try to be very careful with the balance of your game, because it was pretty easy for that to go out the window entirely. There was some real game-breaking stuff you could do in that edition. Alright, so, why don't I get back to the book? So, his praying was less an inconvenience and more a personal idiosyncrasy. Yeah, idiosyncrasy. Somewhat like Mandarallen's archaic speech or Silk's sardonic witticisms.
You're sure there's a cave?
Barak asked him. Relg nodded.
I can feel it.
They turned and rode toward the rockfall. As they drew closer, Relg's eagerness became more obvious. He pushed his horse into the lead and nudged the tired beast into a trot, then a canter. At the edge of the rock slide, he swung down from his horse, stepped behind a large boulder, and disappeared.
It looks as if he knew what he was talking about, Dernick observed. I'll be glad to get out of this wind.
It kind of seems like the first time Dernick's really been described as being tired. He's been emotional before, like once, but... The opening to the cave was narrow. I feel like they did doubt him a little then, but also, I guess they were, Belgarath was more like, something's going on here. Let's follow his instinct. And I mean, it's Barak is the one that's being doubtful here, and Barak is always... I guess Barak just doesn't have a good impression of Relg yet. Maybe he's getting there, though. The opening to the cave was narrow, and it took some pushing and dragging to persuade the horses to squeeze through. But once they were inside, the cave widened out into a large, low-ceilinged chamber. Dernick looked around with approval.
Oh, good place.
He unfastened his axe from the back of his saddle.
We'll need firewood.
I'll help you, Garion said. I'll go too, Silk offered quickly. So close. The little man was looking around at the stone walls and ceiling nervously, and he seemed obviously relieved as soon as the three of them were back outside.
What's wrong?
Dernick asked him.
After last night, closed-in places make me a little edgy, Silk replied.
What was it like? Garion asked him curiously. Going through stone, I mean.
Silk shuddered. It was hideous. We actually seeped into the rock. I could feel it sliding through me.
It got you out, though, Dernick reminded him.
I think I'd almost rather have stayed.
Silk shuddered again. Do we have to talk about it? Firewood was difficult to find on that barren mountainside.
Ooh.
I don't know about that one. Firewood was difficult to find on that barren mountainside, and even more difficult to cut. The tough, springy thorn bushes resisted the blows of Dernick's axe tenaciously. After an hour, as darkness began to close in on them, they had gathered only 3 very scanty armloads.
Did you see anybody?
Barak asked as they re-entered the cave. No, Silk replied.
Tar Ergas is probably looking for you.
I'm sure of it. Silk looked around. Where's Relg?
He went back into the cave to rest his eyes, Belgarath told him. He found water. Ice, actually. We'll have to thaw it before we can water the horses.
Dernick's fire was tiny, and he fed it with twigs and small bits of wood, trying to conserve their meager fuel supply. It proved to be an uncomfortable night. Well, Dernick did make a fire, but apparently it was not a good one. What do we think? Does that count? Sharkies are yelling. Does just a small disappointing fire count for Dernick's pyroness? He was the one that made it. Has anybody else ever made a fire without Dernick in this entire book or series? I guess Garion did once. And we heard about Ashrak making a fire. His first thoughts were, make fire, or get wood, make fire. Sounds like it counts. All right. Okay, that puts us one off. We just need Silk to be a D&D rogue, or Belgroth or Polgara being Snobbish magic, plus Hetar being in Murgo mode. Hetar being in Murgo mode is getting a little more important. Kinda. It's only 2 lines, I guess, that it would help with, and even those are both 2 away, so Silk being a D&D rogue, though, that'll get us a bingo, and that's definitely one that could happen. That's been one where I'm like, has it happened? I don't think anything's really qualified for it. He hasn't really used any D&D specific skills. No lockpicking, no backstabbing, no knife throwing. Just fast talking. That's really and disguise. I guess he's disguised himself, but I don't know. There's also just kind of his old faithful disguise, I feel like, so it wasn't anything special, right? Didn't use uncanny dodge. Yeah. Yeah, he tried to get out of town and failed. Which I feel like that's kind of a first as well. Silk getting caught. That was weird, right? It proved to be an uncomfortable night. In the morning, Aunt Pole looked critically at Relg. You don't seem to be coughing anymore, she told him. How do you feel? I'm fine, he replied, being careful not to look directly at her. The fact that she was a woman seemed to make him terribly uncomfortable, and he tried to avoid her as much as possible. What happened to that cold you had? I don't think it could go through the rock. It was gone when I brought him out of the hillside last night. Is that the right voice? Didn't sound quite right to me. She looked at him gravely. I'd never thought of that, she mused. No one's ever been able to cure a cold before. A cold isn't really that serious a thing, Polgara, Silk told her with a pained look. I'll guarantee you that sliding through rock is never going to be a popular cure. So that's interesting. Relg had never been sick before, and the Sharkies thought, oh, outsiders are bringing illness, but it sounds like it's more likely that it's just that his regular activities keep him healthy. I kind of like that got explained. It took them 4 days to cross the mountains to reach the vast basin Belgarath referred to as the wasteland of Murgos, and another half-day to make their way down the steep basalt face. I feel like we've gone over basalt before, or basalt. I think it was basalt. Basalt. Marmos is on it. The steep basalt face. Another half-day to make their way down the steep basalt face to the black sand of the floor. "What hath caused this huge depression?" Manderallen asked, looking around at the barren expanse of scab rock, black sand, and dirty gray salt flats. Capitalism, Manderallen. Ground angst. Capitalism hath caused this huge depression. The barren expanse of scab rock, black sand, and dirty gray salt flats.
"There was an inland sea here once," Belgarath replied. "When Torak cracked the world, the upheaval broke away the eastern edge, and all the water drained out." "That must have been something to see," Barak said. "We had other things on our minds just then."
"What's that?" Garion asked in alarm, pointing at something sticking out of the sand just ahead of them. The thing had a huge head with a long, sharp-toothed snout. Its eye sockets, as big as buckets, seemed to stare balefully at them.
"I don't think it has a name," Belgarath answered calmly. "They lived in the sea before the water escaped. They've all been dead now for thousands of years."
Another thing without a name? This is a different one. Thing unnamed. As they passed the Dead Sea monster, Garion could see that it was only a skeleton. Its ribs were as big as the rafters of a barn, and its vast, bleached skull larger than a horse. The vacant eye sockets watched them as they rode past.
"Look at the size of the teeth."
Nope, wait, I skipped a line. Manderallen, dressed once again in full armor, stared at the skull. "A fearsome beast," he murmured.
"Look at the size of the teeth,"
Barak said in an awed voice.
"It could bite a man in two with one snap." "That happened a few times," Belgarath told him, "until people learned to avoid this place."
They had moved only a few leagues out into the wasteland when the wind picked up, scouring along the black dunes under the slate-gray sky. The sand began to shift and move, and then, as the wind grew even stronger, it began to whip off the tops of the dunes, stinging their faces.
"We'd better take shelter,"
Belgarath shouted over the shrieking wind.
"This sandstorm's going to get worse as we move out farther from the mountains."
"Are there any caves around?" Dernick asked Relg. Relg shook his head.
"None that we can use. They're all filled with sand." "Over there!"
Barak pointed at a pile of scab rock rising from the edge of a salt flat.
"If we go toward the leeward side, It will keep the wind off us. No, Belgarath shouted. We have to stay to the windward. The sand will pile up at the back. We could be buried alive.
They reached the rock pile and dismounted. The wind tore at their clothing, and the sand billowed across the wasteland like a vast black cloud.
This is poor shelter, Belgarath,
Barak roared, his beard whipping about his shoulders.
How long is this likely to last? A day? 2 days? Sometimes as long as a week.
Dernick had bent to pick up a piece of broken scab rock. He looked at it carefully, turning it over in his hands. It's fractured into square pieces, he said, holding it up. It will stack well. We can build a wall to shelter us.
That will take quite a while,
Barak objected. Did you have something else to do? Sassy Dernick. By evening they had the wall up to shoulder height, and by anchoring the tents to the top of it, and higher up on the side of the rock pile, they were able to get in out of the worst of the wind. It was crowded, since they had to shelter the horses as well, but at least it was out of the storm. They huddled in their cramped shelter for 2 days, with the wind shrieking insanely around them and the taut tent canvas drumming overhead. 2 days. That sounds like a nice time, doesn't it? Then, when the wind finally blew itself out and the black sand began to settle slowly, the silence seemed almost oppressive. As they emerged, Relg glanced up once, then covered his face and sank to his knees, praying desperately. The clearing sky overhead was a bright, chilly blue. Garion moved over to stand beside the praying fanatic. It will be all right, Relg, he told him. He reached out his hand without thinking. Don't touch me, Relg said. Need that bingo space. And continued to pray. Farmhouse got it. Oh, I see. Relg had a lovely time. I missed that. Silk stood, beating the dust and sand out of his clothing. Do these storms come up often? He asked.
It's the season for them,
Belgarath replied. Delightful, Silk said sourly. Then a deep rumbling sound seemed to come from deep in the earth beneath them, and the ground heaved.
Earthquake,
Belgarath warned sharply.
Get the horses out of there.
Walk without rhythm. Dernick and Barak dashed back inside the shelter and led the horses out from behind the trembling wall and onto the salt flats. After several moments, the heaving subsided. Is Cthok doing that? Silk demanded. Is he going to fight us with earthquakes and sandstorms? Belgarath shook his head.
No, nobody's strong enough to do that. That's what's causing it.
He pointed to the south. Far across the wasteland, they could make out a line of dark peaks. A thick plume was rising from one of them, towering into the air, boiling up in great black billows as it rose.
Volcano, the old man said. Probably the same one that erupted last summer and dropped all the ash on this tor. A fire mountain,
Barak rumbled, staring at the great cloud that was growing up out of the mountaintop.
I've never seen one before.
That's 50 leagues away, Belgarath, Silk stated. Would it make the earth shake even here? The old man nodded.
The Earth's all one piece, Silk. The force that's causing that eruption is enormous. It's bound to cause a few ripples. I think we'd better get moving. Tor Urgas's patrols will be out looking for us again now that the sandstorm's blown over.
Which way do we go? Dernick asked, looking around, trying to get his bearings.
That way.
Belgarath pointed toward the smoking mountain. Unexpected science in a fantasy novel. It's not the first time it's come up. Remember stars falling out of the sky to counterbalance the Earth slowing down? That's science, right?
I was afraid you were going to say that,
Barak grumbled. They rode at a gallop for the rest of the day, pausing only to rest the horses. The dreary wasteland seemed to go on forever. The black sand had shifted and piled into new dunes during the sandstorm, and the thick-crusted salt flats had been scoured by the wind until they were nearly white. They passed a number of the huge, bleached skeletons of the sea monsters which had once inhabited this inland ocean. The bony shapes appeared almost to be swimming up out of the black sand, and the cold, empty eye sockets seemed somehow hungry as they galloped past. They stopped for the night beside another shattered outcropping of scab rock. Although the wind had died, it was still bitterly cold, and firewood was scanty. The next morning, as they set out again, Garion began to smell a strange, foul odor. "What's that stink?" he asked.
The Tarn of Cthok,
Belgarath replied. Cthok? C-T-H-O-K. Cthok? Cthok? I don't know. I'm going to pronounce it with more of a T.
It's all that's left of the sea that used to be here. It would have dried out centuries ago, but it's fed by underground springs. It smells like rotten eggs,
Barak said.
There's quite a bit of sulfur in the groundwater around here. I wouldn't drink from the lake. I wasn't planning to.
Barak wrinkled his nose. The Tarn of Cthok was a vast, shallow pond filled with oily-looking water that reeked like all the dead fish in the world. Its surface steamed in the icy air, and the wisps of steam gagged them with the dreadful stink. When they reached the southern tip of the lake, Belgarath signaled for a halt.
This next stretch is dangerous,
he told them soberly.
Don't let your horses wander. Be sure you stay on solid rock. Ground that looks firm quite often won't be, and there are some other things we'll need to watch out for. Keep your eyes on me and do what I do. When I stop, you stop. When I run, you run.
He looked thoughtfully at Relg. The Ulgo had bound another cloth across his eyes, partially to keep out the light, and partially to hide the expanse of the sky above him. I'll lead his horse, grandfather, Garion offered. Belgarath nodded.
It's the only way, I suppose. He's going to have to get over that eventually, Barak said. Maybe, but this isn't the time or place for it. Let's go.
The old man moved forward at a careful walk. The region ahead of them steamed and smoked as they approached it. They passed a large pool of gray mud that bubbled and fumed, and beyond it a sparkling spring of clear water, boiling merrily and cascading a scalding brook down into the mud. At least it's warmer, Silk observed. Mandaralan's face was streaming perspiration beneath his heavy helmet. Much warmer, he agreed. Belgarath had been riding slowly, his head turned slightly as he listened intently.
"Stop!"
he said sharply. They all reined in. Just ahead of them, another pool suddenly erupted as a dirty gray geyser of liquid mud spurted 30 feet into the air. It continued to spout for several minutes, then gradually subsided.
"Now!"
Belgarath barked.
"Run!"
He kicked his horse's flanks, and they galloped past the still heaving surface of the pool, the hooves of their horses splashing in the hot mud that had splattered across their path. When they had passed, the old man slowed again, and once more rode with his ear cocked toward the ground.
"What's he listening for?"
Belgarath asked Polgara. The geysers make a certain noise just before they erupt, she answered.
"I didn't hear anything."
You don't know what to listen for. Behind them, the mud geysers spouted again. Garyon! Aunt Pole snapped as he turned to look back at the mud plume rising from the pool. Watch where you're going! He jerked his eyes back. The ground ahead of him looked quite ordinary. I'll just mute the microphone for a moment because I think Benedict might bark a couple more times. Our burritos have arrived. Our burritos have arrived. Which is good because I am very hungry. I haven't eaten too much today. I had a small bowl of oatmeal and then a sandwich for lunch. But apparently I need a little more food because I'm feeling like a little lightheaded. I think it's going to be a one chapter night if people don't mind too much. I need to eat some food. Alright, so the ground ahead of him looked quite ordinary. Back up, she told him. Dernick, get the reins of Relg's horse. Dernick took the reins, and Garyon began to turn his mount. I said to back up, she repeated. Garyon's horse put one front hoof on the seemingly solid ground, and the hoof sank out of sight. How did your homemade burrito wrap type things turn out? The horse scrambled back and stood trembling as Garyon held him in tightly. I'm sure everyone is probably thinking of the same scene I'm thinking of. Then, carefully, step by step, Garyon backed to the solid rock of the path they followed. Quicksand, Silk said with a sharp intake of his breath. It's all around us, Aunt Pole agreed. Don't wander off the path, any of you. Cheese quesadillas? Cheese-y things? Cheesy tortillas? Cheesy cheese? No, there's only 2 cheese and cheese quesadillas. Silk stared with revulsion at the hoofprint of Garyon's horse, disappearing on the surface of the quicksand. How deep is it? Deep enough, Aunt Pole replied. You were thinking of the fire swamp from Princess Bride? I'm now thinking of the Swamp of Sadness. They moved on, carefully picking their way through the quagmires and quicksand, stopping often as more geysers, some of mud, some of frothy boiling water, shot high into the air. By late afternoon, when they reached a low ridge of hard, solid rock beyond the steaming bog, they were all exhausted from the effort of the concentration it had taken to pass through the hideous region. "Do we have to go through any more like that?" Garion asked.
"No," Belgarath replied. "It's just around the southern edges of the Tarn."
"Can one not go around it, then?" Manderallen inquired.
"It's much longer if you do, and the bog helps to discourage pursuit. Bogs! Bogs!" "What's that?"
Relg cried suddenly.
"What's what?"
Barak asked him.
"I heard something just ahead. A kind of click, like two pebbles knocking together."
Garion felt a quick kind of wave against his face, almost like an unseen ripple in the air, and he knew that Aunt Pole was searching ahead of them with her mind. "Murgos," she said.
"How many?"
Belgarath asked her. "6, and a Grolim. They're waiting for us just behind the ridge." "Only 6?" Manderallen said, sounding a little disappointed. Barak grinned tightly.
"Light entertainment."
"You're getting to be as bad as he is," Silk told the big Cherek. This implication that Barak hasn't always been like this. "Thinkest thou that we might need some plan, my lord?" Manderallen asked Barak.
"Not really,"
Barak replied.
"Not for just 6. Let's go spring their trap."
The two warriors moved into the lead, unobtrusively loosening their swords and their scabbards.
"Has the sun gone down yet?"
Relg asked Garion. "It's just setting." Relg pulled the binding from around his eyes and tugged down the dark veil. He winced and squinted his large eyes almost shut. "You're going to hurt them," Garion told him. "You ought to leave them covered until it gets dark."
"I might need them,"
Relg said as they rode up the ridge toward the waiting Murgo ambush. The Murgos gave no warning. They rode out from behind a large pile of black rock and galloped directly at Manderallen and Barak, their swords swinging. The two warriors, however, were waiting for them, and reacted without that instant of frozen surprise which might have made the attack successful. Manderallen swept his sword from its sheath, even as he drove his warhorse directly into the mount of one of the charging Murgos. He rode in his stirrups and swung a mighty blow downward, splitting the Murgo's head with his heavy blade. The horse, knocked off his feet by the impact, fell heavily backward on top of his dying rider. Barak, also charging at the attackers, chopped another Murgo out of the saddle with 3 massive blows, spattering bright red blood on the sand and rock around them. A third Murgo sidestepped Manderallen's charge and struck at the knight's back, but his blade clanged harmlessly off the steel armor. The Murgo desperately raised his sword to strike again, but stiffened and slid from his saddle as Silk's skillfully thrown dagger sank into his neck, just below the ear. Does that count? A dark-robed Grolim in his polished steel mask had stepped out from behind the rocks. Garion could quite clearly feel the priest's exultation turning to dismay, as Barak and Manderallen systematically chopped his warriors to pieces. The Grolim drew himself up, and Garion sensed that he was gathering his will to strike. But it was too late. Relg had already closed on him. The zealot's heavy shoulders surged as he grasped the front of the Grolim's robe with his knotted hands. Without apparent effort, he lifted and pushed the man back against the flattened face of a house-sized boulder. At first, it appeared that Relg only intended to hold the Grolem pinned against the rock until the others could assist him with the struggling captive. But there was a subtle difference. The set of his shoulders indicated that he had not finished the action he had begun with lifting the man from his feet. The Grolem hammered at Relg's head and shoulders with his fists, but Relg pushed at him inexorably. The rock against which the Grolem was pinned seemed to shimmer slightly around him. "Relg! No!" Silk's cry was strangled. The dark-robed Grolem began to sink into the stone face, his arms flailing wildly as Relg pushed him in with a dreadful slowness. As he went deeper into the rock, the surface closed smoothly over him. Relg continued to push, his arms sliding into the stone as he sank the Grolem deeper and deeper. The priest's two protruding hands continued to twitch and writhe, even after the rest of his body had been totally submerged. Then, Relg drew his arms out of the stone, leaving the Grolem behind. The two hands sticking out of the rock opened once in mute supplication, then stiffened into dead claws. Behind him, Garion could hear the muffled sound of Silk's retching. Barak and Mandaralin had by now engaged two of the remaining Murgos, and the sound of clashing sword blades rang in the chill air. The last Murgo, his eyes wide with fright, wheeled his horse and bolted. Without a word, Dernick jerked his axe free of his saddle and galloped after him. Instead of striking the man down, however, Dernick cut across in front of his opponent's horse, turning him, driving him back. The panic-stricken Murgo flailed at his horse's flanks with the flat of his sword, turning away from the grim-faced smith, and plunged at a dead run back up over the ridge with Dernick close behind him. The last two Murgos were down by then, and Barak and Mandaralin, both wild-eyed with the exaltation of battle, were looking around for more enemies.
"Where's that last one?"
Barak demanded. "Dernick's chasing him," Garion said.
"We can't let him get away. He'll bring others."
"Dernick's going to take care of it," Belgarath told him. Barak fretted.
"Dernick's a good man, but he's not really a warrior. Maybe I'd better go help him."
From beyond the ridge, there was a sudden scream of horror, then another. The third cut off quite suddenly, and there was silence. After several minutes, Dernick came riding back alone, his face somber.
"What happened?"
Barak asked.
"He didn't get away, did he?"
Dernick shook his head. "I chased him into the bog, and he ran into some quicksand."
"Why didn't you cut him down with your axe?"
"I don't really like hitting people," Dernick replied. Silk was staring at Dernick, his face still ashen. "So you just chased him into quicksand instead, and then stood there and watched him go down? Dernick, that's monstrous." "Dead is dead," Dernick told him with uncharacteristic bluntness. "When it's over, doesn't really matter how it happened, does it?" He looked a bit thoughtful. "I am sorry about the horse, though." That was a creepy fight, wasn't it? Well, no, I don't think anybody's forgotten that, but that doesn't mean that Dernick has suddenly become a trained warrior. Strong, yes, and willing to fight, yes, but Barak's probably, just concerned that if the Murgo turned and fought back, maybe there's danger. I feel like Darnick is actually pretty characteristic bluntness. That's fair, yeah. But More, yeah, generally about more everyday things, yeah. Not necessarily about chasing someone into quicksand. So, two pretty nasty deaths, even if Dernick says dead is dead. Kind of with Relg and Dernick on this one. They all wanted to make sure the Murkos were dead, so they used the skills they had. Yeah. I understand Silk being upset as well, though. Because I do think there's also a difference between a quick death and a slow death. And neither of those were necessarily quick. And then, like Dernick said as well, there's the horse. Mm-hmm. Well, I suppose if you're grabbing someone by the shirt and you bash them against the rock, that's not necessarily guaranteed to get things over with quickly. I don't know. I mean, both of them were somewhat practical anyways. Dernick's was a little risky because he risked going into the quicksand himself, right? If he wasn't following precisely or if he couldn't stop his horse in time, whatever. Dernick's was risky in that regard. Relg's, yeah. Relg's probably didn't have to go down the way it did, but Relg probably just didn't think twice about it. Well, I'm very hungry, and I'm gonna need to heat up my burrito anyways, so I'm gonna wrap things up. It's definitely a shorter stream for a Friday. I hope nobody minds too much. But yeah, hopefully everyone has a good weekend. We'll have to see about the Stumpling Festival. If you do decide to go, let us know when you're gonna go. Maybe we can see you there. When burritos call, yes, they are calling me for sure. All right. But yeah, other than that, have a good weekend. I'll be back here next Wednesday. Yeah. All right. Good night, everyone. Bye bye.